do we want to also become a cybersecurity shop? And the answer is usually no, but you kind of have to be in this environment where this these companies are targeted, right? They're the weak link in an economy and a supply chain where, hey, if you can shut down the place that makes all of the bolts or the place that makes the industrial machinery for oil and gas, then it's a big victory as an opponent. So yeah, there's no choice but to become more of a cybersecurity focused company, even when it's not your bread and butter as an industrial company.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, this is Craig Duckworth, and today with me I have the distinguished Jowanza Joseph, the CEO of Parakeet Risk. Welcome, Jowanza. Introduce yourself and give us a little background, if you would, please.
Yeah, thanks, Craig, for having me on. It's a pleasure. And yeah, I am currently the CEO of Parakeet Risk. Previous to this, I worked at Adobe and Pluralsight, MasterCard, all in different roles in engineering. And I kind of spun out to start this company because I felt the industrial sector is kind of maybe the most underserved when it came to technology. And also that the risk management is a space that is boring and not a space that everyone wants to go into. So it left the perfect gap for me. Yeah, I've been working in technology for about 15 years now. And yeah, I'm excited to tackle the problems that are present in this industry.
Welcome. Third-party risk is absolutely critical in today's environment. You look at the supply chain, you look at organizations, especially manufacturers like where we play. And, we are a very large systems integrator. We've got AEC, we've got control systems integration. And we, just as our organization, we have many suppliers that provide stuff to us. We are a supplier to many other organizations. And organizations have to figure out how they manage, how they identify, how they interact with that third-party risk. What's your thought or what's some guidance on how they can begin looking at that, treating that, and trying to mitigate that? I know that's a lot, but you can't eat the elephant in one bite. You got to start a chunk at a time.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'll do my best. I think this is it's an evolving problem and one that becomes more complex in the environment that we're in today with artificial intelligence and kind of the growing role of that software supply chain as we introduce more and more vendors. But the way to think about it, I think, is just the way you would approach any other problem. When you have a system of teams and companies that you work with, not all of them are equal. Some have more weight, some can produce much more liability for you. And so it starts with just an exercise of just cataloging and prioritizing. Okay, which ones of our vendors are the most dangerous? If they were to have a breach, how would that impact us? If their suppliers were to have a breach, how would that impact us? And then going on a kind of a crusade to protect yourself from those risks. So whether that be I need more attestation from this vendor that they do security practices and other practices that matter to me so that I can feel like I'm successfully mitigating this risk. And then all the way down to, do I have adequate insurance for this problem? If something were to go wrong, would I be covered? Would I be able to not suffer a tremendous financial loss from this? So there is kind of the technological step, which we can get to in a second, but really before any technology, it's just understanding who are your vendors. As we work with customers every day, that question sometimes it doesn't have a simple answer. There's not great cataloging. Maybe there's, in the mind of the CEO or in the mind of the people on the field, they know who they are, but having a system, having it cataloged, having it organized, having it scored is really step one. And then step 2 and 3, there's a lot more things that can be done. But I'd say that's where we start.
Well, and I would say just looking at some of our practices and industry practices across the industrial environments as a whole, it's not clear sometimes who those vendors are. You may contract with vendor A who is subbing to vendor B and C, and you don't know, are you getting vendor B's people, vendor C's people, or vendor A's people? And it's sometimes that's not always clear. I know that legal does their best to try and prevent those situations or try to identify those in MSAs and contracts, but it's not always clean sometimes when you have multiple layer upon layer in larger organizations or a very deep third party supply chain, I will call it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And yeah, I'm sure that you see that in your work day to day. And it does present some immense challenges because if you're trying to be thorough, you can't really be thorough if there's just a lot of opaqueness and you're trying to get to a place where there's more clarity. And I think that in this environment where there is such high risk, where we're seeing more and more breaches, where there are more there's a kind of a regulatory density around, especially cybersecurity with third parties. It's reasonable to ask of your vendors and third parties for more. Everyone is doing it. There's more pressure because the risk is higher. And so that does translate into more work for you, but it's work that's worth doing because of the danger that persists.
It is, and we are seeing a lot of that driven by insurance regulations, by coverage. No longer is it appropriate nor acceptable to simply check a box and say, we have a firewall, our OT environments are protected to qualify for cyber insurance. They're asking multi-page documentation about specific environments, the controls environment, the vendor environment that accesses your situation. It's very complex at best.
Certainly. And there is a lot of cost that comes to you as a company in order to furnish these types of data and to continuously monitor it. And there's not always a easy software solution off the shelf like there can be in a purely IT environment. For our IT side of our software, we're able to attest to a lot of things automatically because we just plug into our provider and it just attests to it. In an OT, IT mixed environment, it's going to be a lot harder to do that. You can say you have the firewall, but can you furnish an access log? Can you furnish all the things that you need to do for your insurer to be happy? And the answer is maybe, but it's going to take you having a culture and a cost structure that allows you to do that. But calculating backwards, is this worth it? We're a company, we're trying to build cars or we're trying to build a building. Like, do we want to also become a cybersecurity shop? And the answer is usually no, but you kind of have to be in this environment where these companies are targeted, right? They're the weak link in an economy and a supply chain where, hey, if you can shut down the place that makes all of the bolts or the place that makes the industrial machinery for oil and gas, then it's a big victory as an opponent. So yeah, there's no choice but to become more of a cybersecurity focused company, even when it's not your bread and butter as an industrial company.
Yeah, the nefarious actors are becoming more and more resilient in the way that they treat stuff. The advancement of AI is helping them become bad quicker. It's helping us identify faster and as well. So it's a double-edged sword. But as you look at it, it's not an industrial versus an IT solution. This is everything needs to be looked at holistically across the enterprise, and that doesn't always happen. And a lot of time the leadership is not always fully abreast of what the actual risk is. Would you agree?
I would agree with that. And I would say also that we have created an environment where the checkbox has been adequate for so long. Did you give a questionnaire to your suppliers and did they attest to X, Y, and Z? And you have that on the record. So this is your defense. But it's not really good enough because, as you described, as a kind of a CEO level or C-suite level, There just needs to be a real understanding of the risks that are present and how we are going to mitigate them or transfer them. And yeah, getting that full picture across the whole company, because it's like you said, it's not just OT and IT, it's also access patterns. Who can get into the facility? Who can actually access the controls and the PLCs and the SCADAs, and how much of a threat is that versus who can even get into our Microsoft Teams environment? It's all open questions that doesn't always transfer up to that C-suite level.
And, we're seeing from some of the contractual obligations for tenant versus owner and what the tenant requires the owner to do to meet obligations. A real life example is, we work within the data center environment with multiple clients that are varied from owner operator to tenant to end user and kind of across that entire gamut. And we're seeing regulations being forced down from some of those providers in that mix where they are required contractually to be able to identify a new asset in their OT environment within 5 minutes. That's not days, it's not hours, it's 5 minutes. So again, having that understanding, so now it's a people process technology. So what technology do you have that can do that? What reporting and capabilities you have that can notify that, and then logging to make sure that you satisfy that legal obligation from that third party risk that is being forced down to you as part of those conditions. So it's becoming real, whether that is a insurance driven, that is a compliance governance driven, don't know, but it's a reality.
Yeah, I would say it's kind of all of the above based on what we're seeing. There's contracts that are stipulating this. There is a very scattershot regulatory environment. I know there are some companies like Anthropic that are really begging for some kind of regulatory framework from the federal side. And then there's state regulations that are coming out that are being challenged as well. And then as an operator or owner, you have a tremendous amount of liability. Some of these projects are billions of dollars, and they're running workloads for OpenAI or Anthropic, and you have to protect it. And so you may introduce these draconian types of policies to try to just do another layer of protection. And there's also the insurance side. For the last several years, it's been pretty quiet and a soft market in cyber because while there are headlines about these big breaches, for the kind of average part of the distribution, it's pretty quiet. So it's actually a very, very productive and profitable line of insurance. But now it's changing kind of rapidly. So, we have to think about not only the amount of new vulnerabilities that could be introduced because of AI, but also the kind of attack vectors. So some of the things that we see as we monitor is not only is the number of vulnerabilities just skyrocketing because AI can find them quicker, there's also just no solutions to those either. So your liability is increasing at a pace that's unprecedented, and there needs to be new ways of attacking it, which we don't have all in place quite yet.
And a perfect real life headline that just came out is OpenAI taught its a logarithm to hack out of itself. And I'm like, how, so where does it all stop? At that point, it's just crazy, but the cost of figuring it out has to be in line with the return. It can't be organizations spend $5 million to protect 5,000. That the math won't work. So, as we go through that, it's important that the justification be there.
Yeah, it's challenging because especially in these industrial companies, the kind of margins really vary company by company depending on what you're making. But historically, it's seen as like a high capital expenditure and low margin kind of business that's just does a lot of volume. And so thinking about, okay, let's add more operational expense by doing more cybersecurity doesn't really sound that attractive to the business because there's no returns on any of this, right? The returns are just all defense. But it's, I think the national security implications and the overall implications of what a real breach would do to our ability to get oil and gas and other natural resources and water supply. That's kind of on the side of just being able to produce our shirts and our hats and our basketballs. So we have to do something, but how can we control the cost of doing it? Because the margins that existed traditionally in IT and software, you could keep throwing on more and more software vendors, but it just can't be the same for the company producing vehicles or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I would agree. And you look at an after breach effect on an organization. You've got your reputation, you got your brand, you've got your image. Those are all in the media. And then you've got your cost of not being able to produce something, and those are not often shared with that supply chain. Those are absorbed regardless of where in the supply chain the breach happened. It could be that bolt manufacturer is providing a bolt or a specific part for that car you make that caused this, but it's never that bolt company that's in the headlines. It's the car manufacturer. The reputational damages to that, the let's call it parent. It's not really a parent-child organization, but it's the one that's manufacturing the product, not all the supply that's coming in. So what would a well-run third-party risk program look like? What are some things that organizations need to have in place?
Yeah, I would say kind of maybe harkening back a little bit to the earlier part of the conversation, having that vendor database that is up to date and then also that is weighing each vendor appropriately. That I think that's the base step. We've got to know who are we dealing with, how is what they're furnishing matter to us, whether that's a software product, whether that's a part, whatever it might be. So that's I think a hallmark of a good organization, their kind of vendor database or their supply chain management system is up to date, and then there's someone that's in charge of keeping that, or a team of people that's in charge of keeping that. The next thing is on the cybersecurity side, that we have a really good understanding of where those entry points are. So if we're dealing with vendors that have access to our systems, either remotely or can come in on person, badge in, that there is a real map that's living and an understanding of what exists today and where our kind of our biggest weaknesses are. So that I think that artifact, if ideally in the kind of the most fancy orgs, that's a living artifact. You could pull up a kind of a digital representation. Okay, we can see who's accessing what where. And I would say that maybe the third one and these are all for just like really resilient, good organizations. I say that the third one is that as an organization yourself, you have a real commitment, and maybe you can even furnish an artifact that shows this is what we call a trust center. So this is how we do security. These are the things that we attest to doing. This is how our network is secured. This is, these are the vendors that we operate with. So being able to produce all of that, I think makes you kind of the 1%. And then there's more things you can do on top of that, but these three are just the best place to start.
Okay, and I would call those three probably table stakes, and more organizations that are walking the walk, not just checking a box and talking the talk. So again, it's one thing to culturally do those things, and it's another thing to have a mouthpiece that says we do it, but underneath there are gaps and flaws within that process. Would you say?
Yeah, well, I would say by doing that third thing where you attest to something, right? Because like the SOC 2 framework has some of this, and it's putting you in a position where it can be just kind of a lip service, and you can say we do this. But I think by kind of putting your reputation out there and saying this is what we do, you have to address the things that are below. And I think that the best companies will do that, and the worst companies will just check the box and do the best that they can to just get the certification. But by putting your name out there, I think it does put you in a position as an executive team and as a company to, hey, we really want to attest to these values. That's what I've seen over and over again, is like, if you commit to that, it actually does have those repercussions. But like you said, it does seem table stakes, but you'd be surprised what you find out there.
Yeah. Well, there's all organizations are in different phases or stages of third party risk. You look at a small mom and pop organization that has two or three vendors. They may intimately know those vendors, and they may know, without having something documented, what their cyber hygiene is, and they may feel comfortable. To large global multinational organizations that may have hundreds or thousands of providers that feed into that, let's call it a risk register for lack of a better term, and how that's managed. And when those vendors fall off or new ones come on, or they change policies, or they do something different, it's very complex. So in the event that something does happen or something does go south, who do you normally see is the, let's call it, the responsible party that has to say, here's where we failed? Is that something that you guys help guide, that you advise clients? Is that normally a CEO type? Is it a legal? Is it a communications? And really, where does that fall in line from any experience that you have, that where you guys may have helped someone work through that?
Yeah, certainly. So part of our product is dealing with crisis management, or like mitigating when these types of events happen. And part of our product also helps our customers plan this, like who's going to be in charge of comms, who's going to be in charge of the kind of the liability and reaching out to insurance. And then there's also an element of doing like game days. So, okay, something's happening, like let's just do this and go forward with it.
So an incident response planning type event.
Exactly. And so typically this is going to be outlined as more of a durable thing. So within a policy, you need to have some kind of framework, right? So who's going to be communicating, who's going to be ultimately responsible in terms of the kind of game day, like who's the point of contact. But in this case, it depends on the structure of the company, but typically will be the CEO that's going to be the kind of mouthpiece and figure that is really guiding the public perception of it. But as far as like who will fall on the sword when it's all over, it's going to be whoever is over security, right? That I've seen 9 out of 10 times that's what will happen, is that if it's a security incident, it will be, if there's a chief information security officer or chief information officer, however that company's structured, they typically are going to be the ones that fall on the sword. In some other event, you may see like a chief legal officer fall on the sword, but yeah, that security officer, part of why they're compensated so highly, why they have such a big budget, is because they will inevitably fall on that sword when things go wrong.
Yeah, I would say one of my favorite things to point out in an organization is when I look at a CISO or someone of that level that's responsible, that person often has responsibility for security of the enterprise. But when it comes to the industrial networks and the industrial layer, they don't have the authority to affect change. So they are not intentionally being set up to fail, but being in a position to have responsibility without authority is a horrible spot to be in. And because of the divide between that IT and that OT layer, they don't understand, and that's not always a good position to be in.
Yeah, it's really funny to hear that, and also true, because it's one of the most perplexing things I find about this environment, where I think IT is in some ways superior in terms of like the compensation and the perception, but then OT for these types of companies are, I mean, it's the most important part of the company, right? It's the way that things are built, and the way that they're automated.
The cash register, it makes the money.
It's a cash register. And so, yeah, it's a very perplexing thing because, like you said, the IoT or the IT, CISO maybe never operated any of this type of stuff, right? So they shouldn't have the authority. But then, as an organization, having both these two roles roll up to like a C level, it doesn't always make sense. So there needs to be some consideration of like how we can structure these organizations better. But this conversation has been going on for decades now, so I don't know that there's any quick solutions.
And I don't think there's a quick solution. I think that one, OT really needs to kind of grow up and own this. There needs to be a shared responsibility. And when we see organizations collaborate and work together, when the CISO says, hey guys, we got to fix this problem, and the plant manager or the operations team says, I agree with you. Why don't you come down here to the plant, get yourself a pair of hard-toed shoes and a hard hat, and let's walk out here and you understand the implications of take that Windows 7 machine off the floor today. Okay, this production line is going to go down. Is that okay? Because I don't have the authority to do that. If you have a get out of jail free card from the CEO that says take the plant down while we pull this Windows 7's machine off, I'm all going to do it. But if not, we're going to make our product, and this Windows 7 machine is going to stay right where it is.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great illustration and example of, yeah, just what it looks like, right? Where from an IT perspective, yeah, we can tolerate a lot of downtime, and we can actually put a banner on our website and say, hey, we're going to be offline for 3 hours, right? But from an OT perspective, that's just not acceptable, right? We can do planned downtime, we can do our thing, but we can't. It's just not the same level of SLAs, right? We've got a lot of agreements in this kind of web of agreements, and we just can't go offline for a day so that we can replace this Windows 97 machine with a Windows 8 or whatever. Yeah, it's a completely different environment, and I think there's a way that we can bridge this gap, but like you said, there's no quick fixes. It's much more of a communication and slow roll, and also the IT side, just understanding the OT side a lot better and what it looks like from a kind of day-to-day management perspective.
Yeah, but to get down into that layer, that's where I think we as an industry win. When the collaboration is there, the IT guys that have the responsibility come down to the plant, they spend some time on the plant floor, they understand the process. So they have a respect from the OT teams, which might grant them that authority to do what they need to do. But you're right. This is not an overnight fix. It's been decades in the making. I think we're getting closer, but we're not there yet.
I agree. And when you consider the emergence of IT and how the salaries there have just skyrocketed, and OT, it's not seen as a comparable alternative. It's just sort of seen as, oh, you're the blue collar programmer, right, versus the white collar. Yeah, there is some cultural divide that needs to be mended.
Yep. So if you could give maybe a couple steps that organizations could do today that are trying to figure this out, where can they start? What's a couple pointers that would get them on the right path, maybe?
Yeah, that's a great question. And sorry to beat the same drum again, but I think the most important thing is the cataloging. Like, you have to know who you're even interfacing with, which that is a harder question to answer than it seems on the surface. You may know, hey, we get our parts from Bob Inc., but do you know anything about Bob Inc. and how they do security? Maybe maybe their whole network is open. Maybe they have interns working there that shouldn't have privileged access, but do. So you need to start and understand who are the places that are the most threatening to me, and what are their practices. And then that's something that should come at minimal cost. It doesn't require you to buy any software. It just is an exercise in doing that. I'd say the second thing is really getting a handle on your own posture? Like, what is it today that you do, if you do anything at all? Do you secure your networks? Do you have an air gap solution? Who has access to the different vendors of software that you have procurement and contracts with? And so I think they sound very table stakes, but we work with giant organizations, and some of this stuff's missing, right? It's not fully cataloged, it's not fully understood. So I think that, it's as unsexy as that sounds, it's, I think, the place that makes the most sense to start, and that will expose a lot, right? It will be very clear, hey, we don't have any idea about this, and maybe we should invest in a tool that will help us to get this information quicker, catalog it faster. Maybe we should invest in a tool that already knows about the security posture of these companies, and we could fill our database in with that. So it gives you a base to then move forward from there.
Yeah, no, and I absolutely wouldn't apologize for repeating it, because I, like a lot of other people, need to hear it like 5 or 6 or 7 times to fully comprehend it. And that was only the third time. So beat that drum. I don't mind at all. I think it's good. So from your experience, where do you see the space going? Do you see it continuing to evolve? And how do organizations that take that advice, that are strengthening that third-party vendor profile, how do they position themselves within the ecosystem versus ones that don't take it as serious?
Yeah, I'm going to get a little bit fi tin hat here, so I apologize a little bit. But the way I see this going into the future is that each company will have some kind of attestation, like a verifiable credential that says, this is how we do things, right? This is how our OT environment is, this is how our IT environment is. This is a list of all of our sub-processors or third parties that we deal with, and that we will kind of have these almost like trading cards that we can use and attest to each other. I think that's necessary and sufficient as well, but it's going to be very, very hard to get here. But that's where I see the future in about 5 years. That's how we'll all transact. How to get there is it's going to be a combination of like really open standards that says this is how this should even look. And then we need a system of getting to this data cheaper and faster, right? If it's going to take us millions of dollars to catalog all of this, trade these cards, it's never going to happen. We have to have a way that this is pretty much zero cost for some people in this ecosystem, and that the cost is borne by maybe the ones that can bear the cost the most. And so that's where we're trying to get to, and what we're trying to contribute. But that's what I imagine.
Okay, no, great insight, great conversation. We could talk about this for days. The industry as a whole really needs to take a look at how they're managing it and understand what their true risks are, from whether that's being driven by GRC, that's being driven by insurance requirements, if that's just driven by the cultural values of the organization to do better. Really, it's a need. And thank you so much for your time and helping us understand it, guidance on it, and hopefully the listeners learn something.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. This was a real pleasure. And I just love this industry. And I think whatever can be done to help protect the operators and help us to be more prosperous as a world. Imagining a world where we can reduce a lot of these risks and these costs, and then we can have cheaper housing, I got a feeling the other day, cheaper filling, right? It's a world I want to live in. I hope to be a small part of that.
Yep, you're doing it. Keep up the great work. Thank you for your time. Great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.